is the Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for joining us. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Darcy Bachert, founder and CEO of Prolucid Technologies, a software engineering firm specializing in the design and development of complex mission-critical systems. With deep expertise and experience building software for highly regulated industry, including medtech, nuclear, and industrial applications, Darcy focuses on helping organizations commercialize advanced technologies with an emphasis on quality, cybersecurity, and compliance. Darcy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to talk about these very important topics.
Great. So where are you calling from today?
So I'm actually calling from Mississauga. It's essentially just outside Toronto, Ontario, Canada. If you've ever been to the airport in Toronto, we're pretty much right there.
Oh, great. Well, tell us about how Prolucid began. What's the origin story there? How did you come to your current focus on mission critical software, for medical, nuclear, and other regulated industries?
And so I'd like to say there was a whole master plan behind it, but part of it's being in the right place at the right time. When Prolucid was first founded, we were focused on industrial automation for manufacturing. So we did a lot of work in automotive. We a pretty big manufacturing cluster in Ontario here that we supported. And that was 2008 going into the Great Recession. And a lot of our customers and projects kind of went away in a very short period of time based on what was happening. And so we looked at what other areas are there where we can take these kind of same skill sets and do more with. And through some partner channels and other work, we got more involved with the nuclear industry as well as the medtech industry. And not that they're completely recession or geopolitical proof in any way, but they tend to be a bit more stable industries in areas where, we felt we could make a bigger impact. So it started in that manufacturing side and really migrated into those industries over time.
Great. Well, tell us more about investors, and how they misunderstand about regulated software, the timelines, the validation. What do they get wrong about that?
I think they do get a lot right in that, bringing a consumer product to market, you don't have to go through FDA. You don't have to go through all of these steps along the way to get something on market. So it can be a much faster process. And on the regulated side, on average, bringing a medical device to market can be 7 years and $30 to $40 million. It can be way more than that. It can be less, but it's a longer time frame to go from that initial concept to being able to generate revenue. And so because of that, you have to have an investor that wants to be in it for a bit more of the long term, or at least to get to that next point where as a secondary or something else, they can get out. The flip side is that because it's a longer process to get something on market, you have a bit more of a moat or defense against someone just coming in and copying what you do and really replacing it. So I think there's pros and cons to it. I wouldn't say they have it completely wrong. I think they have a lot right. But if you've never invested in medtech before, you definitely need to understand the journey that you're about to go through and getting something to market.
Great. Well, we see a lot of AI coming into medtech world, in particular medical devices and other areas. And, these are real world applications. How does the Prolucid team help teams move from prototypes to production in this space?
Yeah, you're correct. There's a lot more AI and agentic based workflows that we're seeing being brought into medical, and the ability for them to really disrupt and change the standard of care and make a real step improvement is there. We're working with several right now where they're using AI-based technologies to take something that would normally be a very, very long process with multiple steps and give a clinician, a doctor, a surgeon information almost instantly. So helping with triage to figure out whether or not this is the right candidate for surgery, whether or not they actually need it, being able to fast track that, improve that diagnostic so they can make a better decision and then give treatment or intervention faster. So we're seeing a lot of transformation. Where we really fit is oftentimes our customers have a real early stage prototype algorithm that works in a lab, and it's highly controlled in that environment. And to take that and actually make it work in clinic and hospital requires a lot of work on hardening, making sure the overall workflow makes sense. And ultimately that end user, whether it's a doctor, someone on the admin side, they have to be able to understand how to use it and how to apply it within their practice and their workflow. So not just the technology side, but it's really that user adoption side. Can they use this? Do they understand it? Do they trust it? If so, and it makes their lives better and faster, then they'll buy it.
So you do a lot of work in, taking requirements into commercialization. How do you practically walk through the process of meeting, specific certifications like ISO 13485 and other standards?
So the quality side of things is obviously critical for anything that happens in regulated industries. And I'm sure we're all happy to know that a life-saving technology or something that's going into a nuclear reactor is done the right way because the public safety is so important. Before even getting there, though, we always start with a phase zero approach. And one of the things we do in there is a gap analysis on regulatory compliance, data privacy, cybersecurity. We ask a lot of questions around what they're trying to do with this device or this product, what the regulatory pathway is going to be. So as we're going about it, we know that following the design controls and the development process as part of our quality management system, we can do that correctly, but also knowing their indication of use and what's happening, it gives us the full picture of here's how we're going to build it, here's what it needs to do at the end, here's how we're going to validate it, here's the documentation that goes with it. Because when they go to submit, we want them to be successful the first time. We don't want them to have to come back and do rework. And so we build that into everything from initial discovery conversations all the way through that final testing and release.
Well, let's talk about the digital health integration challenges that are out there. We see a lot of companies making great progress with digital health tools, and healthcare industry is such a big market as well. But what have you learned about integrating devices and software with, EHR and EMR systems and, just the hospital IT environments? What are you seeing there?
So depending on what you're integrating with, it's a little bit of the wild, wild west still out there, to be honest. And oftentimes when we're talking to a customer, we say, if your initial product can do what it needs to do without requiring all these integrations, that is a much better path to market. And the reason is that there are so many different types of PACS systems. Each one has its own uniquenesses that you have to work with. There's the EHR side, it's the same. You have the Epic and Cerners, you have the big ones, but there's smaller ones. So the biggest challenge, though, is not the technical side of integration. It's more the hospital IT side. Sometimes we see their backlog of being able to take your new product and bring it into their hospital network and infrastructure and integrations can be 16 months to sometimes up to 3 years. So if you have a 2 to 3 year backlog before you can sell to a hospital because you have that connectivity, that can be pretty detrimental to the business. So if you can get that core product in there first, then once it's in, work on that integration, it tends to be a much smoother process.
All right. Well, let's talk a bit about cybersecurity and the challenges there. I mean, how does security and software bill of material requirements change the diligence for investors and buyers? What are you seeing there?
Again, I think it's overall a positive in that cybersecurity is critical for these instruments because, pacemakers and all sorts of devices, if they can be compromised, they can severely harm or even cause death. So I think it's a really, really critical thing. And the FDA has been working on this. In 2023, they came out with their formal, E-Star submission process that you have to go through. So if you're going to have a cyber device, which is any device that's got software with the ability to connect to the internet, it has to go through a very rigid process to make sure that it's secure. This starts with a cyber risk assessment. There's all of the different threat views. So looking at any potential area where the device could be compromised. You have to create the software bill of materials. And the reason for that is we want to understand every piece of software that's involved. And if there are any vulnerabilities identified, you have to monitor them and have the ability to patch them. So it's not just building it secure to start, making sure that it stays secure as you go. And so that overall process, it adds time, it adds some cost. But from an investor point of view, if you're talking to a company that isn't doing it or doesn't know about that, they really should, because they won't get through approval. They will be, if that submission does not have a proper cybersecurity story when they go to FDA, the FDA will just reject it. And now you're looking at months of delays. So make sure that there's a proper cybersecurity story and team in place for any cyber device that you're looking at investing in.
Well, let's talk about you work with startups as well as large strategics and probably everybody in between. Tell us about your experience and how each group does in these areas when building regulated software products. What are the strengths and weaknesses of startups, and what are the challenges and benefits of large strategics?
On the startup side of things, I think the strength is that they tend to be very entrepreneurial and innovative at their core. They are looking at taking a bit more risk. and really solving a problem, proving it out, and getting it to market. So they tend to be able to go kind of end to end faster, with just less layers of approvals that are required. The biggest challenge that we see them facing is usually funding related. Making sure they've got that, making sure they've got reimbursement lined up, making sure they really understand the voice of the user, and that they're not building a solution and trying to find a problem. They've got a problem that they're building a solution for. So if they have those things, really well thought up, the investment usually does come. And then when it does, the ability for a startup to really execute quickly and to pivot if needed is really fantastic. On the enterprise, larger multinational side of things, a lot of it's kind of flipped. Usually they will have access to budgets or funding, but they aren't as open to taking risks. They're going to want to make sure that's done more in an incremental way. There's a lot more stakeholders involved. And so to do something really disruptive for a large multinational is a bit more challenging. And oftentimes what we see them do is, as strategics, they're supporting and working with the startups. And when the startups have de-risked and done that part they don't like to do, they'll oftentimes acquire them or partner with them or license the technology. So very different strengths and weaknesses and kind of views of how they look at innovation within the space.
All right. Well, let's talk about choosing the right engineering partner. What signals investors and founders should look for when evaluating software partners, and then what red flags to avoid?
I think there's several layers to this. Having someone that has the quality management systems in place, the track record of having successfully taken other startups or large enterprise projects from initial concept all the way through FDA and CE mark. So it's that track record of doing it. So those are all kind of just the credible things. I think on our side, one of the most important parts is how you engage. That phase zero I mentioned, we really need to understand what the customer's trying to accomplish, what the problem is they're trying to solve, the goals that they have, and ask a lot of really good questions. If you're talking to someone and they're not asking questions, they're not engaged. So we want to ask as many questions as we can to really get alignment on what's being built, but also share, here's what we've done for others. It becomes a very collaborative thing. So that's the track record, the quality management systems, but how the engagement works. It's really, we're working together. We're going to share. We're going to help. We're in this together because at the end, if they're successful, we're successful and vice versa. So I think that's a bit more of the intangible side, just how that working engagement looks like with any vendor that you're talking to.
Can you call out one or two red flags that would tell a startup that this is probably not going to end well and they should end it now? What do you see as the upfront flags that tell you this is not going to go?
I think if they can't, share a success story of taking a company through FDA approval, that would be one. If they don't have a quality management system, or if they're not, aware of what it is, it's another one. But it's how they engage at that early stage. If they're not asking questions, if they're not sharing what they've done, if they're not really leaning in to really understand what you're trying to do, if it's just here's a fixed fee quote, take it or leave it with no engagement, that's something that we really want to avoid.
Okay, great. Well, let's talk about, data analytics and ongoing monitoring. How is data collection analytics, reshaping product value and post-market support?
Yeah, this is one that I think has went from a bit more of a hype curve into reality, especially with the advancements around agentic AI and AI workflows. We've always talked about data being so important, and we saw a lot of customers collect a lot of it, but the tools and sophistication to really use it to make the product better, to identify an area for a new product, to improve a workflow, it was much harder to do. And now we see traditional AI-based models. They work great if you're looking at specific use cases like image classification or signal processing. So some areas they worked well, but these AI workflows now allow us to triage better, to take information better, to be able to look up all these resources and guides that an ER doc would have and pull that in so they better know what tests they should do based on complaint. So it's all these areas that we're seeing where because of agentic AI and AI workflows and RAG type systems, that data that's being collected is now turning into a lot more action that actually drives value.
Well, how do you know if you should try and monetize your data or not? I joined a networking group the other day and got on the Slack channel that they had and was surprised to find that just about everybody was a data analytics company or was trying to do something in that direction. What tells you that this is a good opportunity or it's not?
I do believe this is unique for every company. If you build a physical widget that does something, I don't know how important it would necessarily be to collect massive amounts of data. But if you're more in digital health or you're in the areas of medical and hospitals where there's a lot of inefficiency or overhead or bureaucracy, there's places that are obvious fits to really make it faster and better. And that's where we would try to focus. So it's what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and how would this data being packaged the right way solve it? So start with that. This workflow is flawed. This procedure is inaccurate. This communication between a doctor and specialist is broken. So there's specific problems that you can fix, and the data that you have being packaged, processed, and transferred into something more useful the right way makes sense, then great. So that's what we always start with. What's the actual problem that you think you can solve by collecting and analyzing and generating something from this data?
Right, we mentioned AI a few moments ago, and I've seen that the use of monetizing data is now expanded into data and AI models. Everybody's building their own LLM now, and with the opportunity to actually sell it to other people. You want to learn about my space, I have everything modeled here, I have all the standard data. You can actually use that to inform your system. Where do you think that's going?
Well, we're seeing some of the larger hospital networks actually doing this. So you think about the Mayos and the Cleveland Clinics and others, where they are sitting on this, gold mine of well-labeled, classified data. It could be imaging data, it could be other types of diagnostic, but having that is extremely valuable for a startup who can then, have a license agreement to work with them. And for them to go and collect all that data on their own would be, tremendous, tremendous burden and take a lot of time. So it allows them to get something to market faster. So there's the data collection side of it, which is so critical because if you don't collect it and label it the right way, any AI you try and create, any models you try and create are fundamentally going to be flawed. But once you have that data set, whether it's licensing from a big hospital network or building it yourself, that can become a really big moat. So from an investment point of view, a company that has access to, really good data, whether it's their own or licensed, that's a really, really big step in de-risking that development journey. Now you can develop the AI around it, which does a way better job of solving that problem you're looking at tackling. So in some cases, it's the mode itself. In some cases, it's a much better path to commercialization by having access or license to someone else's data.
So when a startup comes that says they're in AI, the first question investors ask today is, what's your proprietary data source? Because if you're just scraping data off the web, well, everyone else will, and you won't have a competitive moat. But if you have your own source of data, that becomes interesting. How do you know that that data is going to be very useful, or what criteria do you put on to say that is valuable data that you should be capturing?
So sometimes when we start as the part of that phase zero I mentioned, we do that gap analysis. We're not just looking at the regulatory, the cyber, we're also looking at their algorithms. We're looking at the data collection strategy that they have, how well it's labeled. And we can very quickly get a sense of, not only do you have a really, really strong data set, it's well labeled, but it would be quite difficult for someone else to go and build this exact same data set. And that could be a case where, with PACS, everyone has access to a pretty large set of MRI or CT or other type of imaging. So that in its own is maybe a little bit less of a moat. But if that's combined with other sensor data that's been collected in parallel to combine, give you a much more intelligent view of what's going on, those are areas where it becomes a lot better proprietary data set. Otherwise, you're relying on the AI and the algorithms that you've done, the data science behind it being just far superior to someone else. And more recently, we're now seeing AI startups where they've essentially just built an agentic workflow around open source data. And it's really hard to defend that because if they could do that in a month or two, why couldn't someone else do the exact same thing? So I think there's ways we can really look at that and see, you've got a really strong proprietary data set where you've got a really, really unique algorithm that's going to be hard to replicate, or you've got something else combined with it that makes this really defensible and really valuable.
Well, to continue on the AI theme, where do you think the opportunity is going to show up first? It's being used in med tech, digital health, industrial automation, but over the next 3 to 5 years, where do you think the biggest impact is going to be for it?
I think that we're just starting to see the impact of the agentic side. So AI workflows all the way through actual agents, RAG type systems. And the reason is a lot of the challenge within healthcare in general is not necessarily just the device itself that does the procedure or the diagnostic, it's everything around it. There still is paper based, there's information that's contained in silos. I'd like to see a place where if you go in with a complaint, why couldn't you have the scan done, on that visit, have the diagnostic done in real time, and before you leave, know what the condition is and what that next step is, as opposed to having to have multiple steps of triage and then come back for a scan and then go to the GP and then get referred to a specialist and then back. So I think there's areas within that workflow that can make it a much more effective, efficient experience and ultimately be way better for the patient. So that's where I see a lot of the disruption that I think will happen. I'm not sure if it's traditional med device or med tech. It might almost start to get outside of that space, but that's the part where we're really watching and excited for.
That's great. Well, the last few minutes that we have here today, what else should we cover that we haven't?
I think that was one of the topics that I was hoping we got into was some of the agentic and the workflows. And, I know this is more med tech focused, but a lot of these same things we're doing, we're applying into nuclear and other regulated industries where, you know, typically they're a little bit behind when it comes to software and how software can be used and AI can be used to really make things better, more efficient, solve problems that we couldn't before. So pretty excited for where we're at right now, the opportunity ahead. And hopefully the investment keeps going because I think we still have an aging population. We're going to need more and more energy. And so any way that we can make these better for patients, for the overall systems, I think software is going to have a huge part to play in there. So pretty excited for the opportunity.
Right. So, how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn as well as happy to share email. So just darcy.bachert@prolucid.ca. Anyone has any questions or interested, I'd love to chat.
Great. We'll put your contact details in the show notes. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow up soon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Halty Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.